having played it, and hypnotically deep. And I loved playing through it. But actually, the first time I ever played it was in like mid-2010s, which is also when we met at a fantastic arcade. And I played a demo of it, like an early bit of it, in front of this theater. And Andrew was just extremely silent the whole time. And regardless of how much I struggled and asked questions, he was totally unhelpful. And I was not surprised when the game finally released in March of this year, after going through the journey of finishing it with a small team, that it played just as beautifully and felt beautiful in the same way that it did back then. And it speaks to the tenacity of his vision. And I think there's a clear through line of his experience previous to working on Tunic, making these adventure games that have hidden objects and like intricate puzzle designs and things like that. And I think just it is a sort of a feat of design, and it plays beautifully, and it watches, or you can kind of, even just watching, I think like speedrunners play through it, it was very beautiful. So we're really, I think, honored. I'm certainly honored to have him here to talk about the secrets of this game and kind of reveal some of the sublimes of it. So please join me in welcoming Andrew Shouldice to the talk.
Shucks. Thank you. Okay, hi. My name is Andrew Shouldice, and this talk is called This Was Here the Whole Time. So, as Winnie said, I'm the primary developer on a game called Tunic, which I worked on with many others. And I'm going to give a brief sort of introduction of it. Tunic is an isometric action-adventure about a tiny fox in a big world where you explore the wilderness, fight monsters, and find secrets. And here are some pictures from it. The exploration side of things is centered around exploring interconnected exterior open spaces and some interior, more dungeon-like spaces. The fighting component is centered around sort of dodge roll type stuff, some light stamina management, and an assortment of items, both consumables and some key items, and big boss fights. On the secret side, there's things that range from, I didn't know I could go down this little passageway, I didn't know that I could slip behind this waterfall, that sort of thing, to mechanics that have always existed, but are not explicitly surfaced, and some larger scale puzzles that are integrated into the world itself, and a few that sort of verge onto being outside of the game. The main feature of the game is this sort of manual, which is a 50-odd page instruction booklet, very much like an NES manual from the 80s. And it has all the things that you would expect to see in a manual like that. Maps and things you're supposed to do, instructions on how the world works, and outlines of its mechanics. And it's written in this glyph language that is intentionally opaque. It's got sections about story and bestiaries and a memo page at the end. So there are going to be spoilers in the talk. How many people have played the game? I guess just okay. Good number. Cool. Thank you. So there will be some spoilers. I'm sorry. Briefly, an outline of what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about the original design goals of the game, like Winnie mentioned, sort of from the beginning, what was the goal of the whole thing, and then present a model for thinking about secrets and their life cycle, and how that model helped during the development of Tunic, helped add mystery to the game. And then I'll talk a little bit about hiding things in plain sight, why I think that's cool, and how we went about doing it to achieve those same design goals. So some quick caveats. This is the first game of this type that I've made, and you can therefore take most of the things that I say with a grain of salt. I'm speaking descriptively mostly, as in I'm talking about things that we did to help Tunic achieve its goals, not necessarily prescriptive, like these are the rules that everyone needs to follow. I'm also maybe going to, I'm not an academic, so I might use terminology that's incorrect. Please let me know afterwards if there are sort of canonical names for some of these concepts. And I might also speak broadly about things, and people wiser than me might have other opinions. So also, please, I'd be excited to hear those. So the design goals. Well before I started work on Tunic or Secret Legend at the time, there was this sort of idea soup that had been following me around for a while, and it was a feeling I remember having playing old games and exploring the forest and just sort of generally being a kid, and sort of a slippery concept. I knew what it felt like, but I didn't have a tidy name for it, and I still don't really. But I went back to one of my old notebooks in preparation for this talk and sort of flipped through it to find out what I was thinking at the time. So these are notes from 2010. So this is 5 years before I even started work on the project. And there's a page there that has a bunch of notes on it that seem relevant, like, and again, this is me trying to articulate this weird feeling that I knew the sort of symptoms of and maybe the causes of, but didn't know what it was. Being off the beaten path, actually discovering things, depth that is to be discovered and explored, not doled out at the appropriate time, complexity and depth that is not designed away, it's not inaccessible by intent, is not simply behind a locked door, feeling like you have discovered an always extant mechanic. This was here all along, the allure of exploring an open world. And this was here all along was sort of the one that stood out there. And so there was this idea cloud, and I started work on the game, and then 7 years passed while I was working on it. And whether or not any individual person feels those things when they play it is obviously going to be subjective, but the people that do like the game often cite things like, it has this special feeling of nostalgia and actual discovery, and oh my gosh, this was here the whole time. So why am I going down this memory lane? A couple of reasons. Number one, it's kind of neat. This is 12-year-old notes for a game that came out this year. First reason is, the talks like this are supposed to have takeaways, things that you can sort of mentally note and apply somehow. So my first tip is writing stuff down is useful. A little bit obvious, but for this game in particular, I found it really cool to have this sort of crystallize this early idea and use it as a compass later on, not to necessarily slavishly follow, but to use as sort of a guide. Like, wait, what was I really going for? Especially with a game that is about secrets, where sometimes the joy of them can get bled out of it. Like if you know all the answers, there's really no secrets there anymore, right? Also, if something takes 7 years, it's good to know, like, what was I even doing? And so the second reason that I'm showing you this is to communicate this very vague mystery idea, because I still don't really have a good name for it, but it's sort of what the rest of the talk is about. So I'm trying to introduce it, even if it doesn't really have a nice name. Mystery sort of connotes a whodunit, which it's not really a whodunit. That's not what it's about. And wonder is a little bit vague, a little wishy-washy. So the best that I really have is the excitement of not knowing, or rather of knowing that there's lots to know, but not knowing it yet. And knowing you could know, but no one's expecting you to know. So no one will know that you know when you do eventually know, which is why mystery is just going to have to suffice. As an aside, a couple of years after I wrote down that list, I played a game called Frog Fractions. And a couple of years after that, Jim Stormdancer did a talk called Preserving a Sense of Discovery in the Age of Spoilers, which I'm plugging here. It's a really excellent talk. He talks about playing a video game in the 80s with this quote saying, playing a video game meant entering an unknowable world operating under confusing rules where anything could happen. And I think that's wonderful. It's a really good way of phrasing that. And another nice thing about that talk is that it's got a lot of those nice sort of actionable, here are some, takeaways. So I ended up thinking a lot about secrets and trying to understand them a little bit more. And so I've got this idea of a life cycle of a secret. And you can, anything like a secret or a mechanic or an area or anything like that could be broken into 3 phases. You have ignorance, which is the beginning where you don't know, and then knowledge, where you know something, but you don't quite understand it. And then understanding, where you have closure on that thing, where everything is sort of clicked and a mystery is turned into comprehension. You know, now you have a solved mystery. And it's not super tidy, it's not empirical in any way. Depending on how you abstract things or categorize things, it's going to be different. But it was a useful way to think about things. So, you know, an example being, I am exploring and I find a mysterious item and I don't know what it does. I'm in the knowledge phase, and I'm excited that I don't know what it's for. And then maybe you discover what it's for. Oh, it's a key that unlocks this door, or something like that. That's understanding. And we as players are naturally inclined to follow this progression, you know? We want to progress along this sort of chain in a really abstract sense, maybe. That's sort of what playing games is about. Like, in a really abstract sense, it's about learning and trying to get meaning out of those things. So when we're here at the bottom, your natural inclination, your motivation to move to the next one is curiosity, right? It instead of us to explore. And when we move to knowledge, we've made a discovery. And our motivation at that point switches a little bit to a sort of a puzzle-solving mode, where we have something in our head with a bunch of question marks around it. We want to turn that into a little exclamation point. And when we do that, we get our aha moment. And that's where things like puzzle games have their sort of bread and butter, right? That's the revelatory moment that feels good, you know, feels good to turn those question marks into exclamation points. I really love question marks, though, right? That's my favorite part, is this that mode right in there. Resolution feels really good, like I get that, but I want to spend as much time as possible there in that area, and I hesitate to like introduce psychology and neurochemistry and stuff. When people talk about, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding when I took a neurochem course was that it's dopamine. We talk about that being instrumental in motivation. It's not getting the reward that gives you the dopamine. It's an anticipation thing, right? So it's a question mark has a certain amount of value to it, and then when it gets turned into an exclamation point, the luster soon fades, and eventually the sort of the concept itself gets squared away in your mind. You don't need to think about that anymore, and it disappears. It's a little bit like Tetris. This is awesome, right? This is what you're playing the game for. You're about to do the cool thing, right? We're about to get a Tetris here. This is less interesting, right? The score is higher. Ostensibly, this is better, but this is much more exciting, right? The part that's cool is gone now. So to help organize my thoughts on this a little bit, here you go. Thank you. I have an analogy here. So anytime you have something in a game, like a mechanic, an area that you're going to discover, an item that you're unsure about, you name it, is represented by like a little path. And you can think of that path as a track leading off into the darkness. You know, maybe it's going off into a forest or disappearing into the mist, something like that. And when we're playing a game, one with secrets in it at least, we're playing a game where we have a little mental map of all of these paths. You know, like there's a giant door at the top of the stairs. I don't know what that's all about. There's this weird item I found. Not sure what it's for. There's a monolith up on the cliffside. There's a chest that I couldn't get to. I read about this thing called the Holy Cross in the manual, but no idea what that means. There's an area that I can't get to because it's too dark. I know there's something in there. What are these gold platforms for? And so for any given path, that first phase there, ignorance, is when you don't know it exists. And it's not on our little mental map at all. And then by some reason or another, we learn about it. We learn it exists. And now we have it as a path on our mental map. That's our knowledge phase. We don't know where it goes yet. And understanding is when we do. We do know where it goes. You know, that chest that I couldn't get to there, it had $20 in it. Hooray. So here are two paths. I think I can upgrade my stats somehow, and I found a weird item. Not sure what it's for. More often than not, two paths tie together, right? Like, you know, the weird item I used to upgrade my stats. And you get that little burst of joy from doing that. And more often than not, when they come together, they will give birth to new things. First of all, this needs to happen, right? That joining of paths needs to happen. You can't just add paths forever. You know, we'll learn that there's no point to anticipating something that's never going to come. But we can add new paths. So how do I get into this area? What are these gold platforms for? Might combine with the gold platforms are some sort of teleporter that takes me to a warp zone, spirit realm sort of thing. And then you've got this new path, this sort of, you know, what's up with this warp zone? And in a previous version of this analogy, these were like threads. You had this idea of loose threads that you're keeping track of. And I think the joy here is sort of speculation, right? It's curiosity that we're using here. When you've got all these raw ends, these paths disappearing into the mist, your imagination is encouraged to fill in the gaps. You know, what if this key goes in this door and there's a new area on the other side of it? Or what if I use it in a different way? Or maybe it goes like this, or like this, or like this, or like this, or maybe there's, you know, some giant revelation right around the corner that ties everything together and then explodes outward. That's the kind of stuff that I like, right? And if you're like me and want to have all those loose ends all the time, then here's some actionable items: is have lots of paths, have them connect in meaningful ways, and have new paths be added all the time. Which sounds easy, but it's pretty hard because all of these are content, and content is hard. It's time-consuming. It's expensive. So I'm going to go over some sort of like things that we did to try to increase the density of paths during the development of Tunic. Number one was introducing things early. I think this is maybe standard Game Design 101 sort of stuff, where you show people the prize before they get it, and maybe show them their objective before they get there. But I think it's valuable to show people things that they don't understand at all as early as possible. Introduce those paths as early as possible. So, you know, the golden pads appear very early. There's a bunch of stuff in the first few minutes of the game that you can't get to. What's this mysterious language? How do I get to this chest? There's a locked door. There's this little missable path a little ways into the game that you could miss, but if you don't, if you chop down some bushes and go through there, there's a prize. But more importantly, you get to view this sort of strange obelisk, and it's clearly important, but what is it there for? So trying to introduce those paths as early as possible ended up being useful. Breaking things up a little bit also. I tried to see if there was a way to take the constituent components of something and turn them into multiple, you know, threads or paths. So, for example, you know, take that one, break it into two. Example being, you know, those monoliths are introduced fairly early, but not immediately adjacent to glowing purple paths on the ground. And it's not until shortly after that we tie those two ideas together and say, you know, these are related somehow. You know, this is like a power system of some kind, and this is power moving through these things. These black monoliths control the flow of the power somehow. So instead of introducing, it's a power grid, what's up with that, as a single thread, it's, you know, there are these weird black monoliths, not sure what they're for, and there's these purple traces on the ground. I don't know what those are for either. And, oh, it's a power grid, and you get a little, you know, hopefully burst of joy when that happens. And it's also a meaningful connection, sort of not quite for free, but you know what I mean. Like it's a true meaningful connection because they are intimately related. Another thing that I tried to do was being careful with symmetry. I have a love-hate relationship with symmetry. I like the beauty of it, the aesthetics of it, but it means spilling the beans too early sometimes. And so when it comes to, designing dungeons, you might look to something like a Zelda game and crib from that to see what the form should take. And in a Zelda dungeon, you've got a theme and a gimmick and a special item that relates to the gimmick and a boss that you use the special item to defeat and a MacGuffin of some kind at the end. And that's all well and good, but once you understand that there's a sequence of dungeons and you sort of understand how big they are, it becomes sort of gridding out this thing, and there's a certain satisfaction to that, don't get me wrong, but it can draw a little bit of a box around what the game is. And so when you see something like this and you see a target and it's very obviously a target, and like, okay, I've played a Zelda game, I know I'm getting the hook shot here, and you sort of prematurely filled in a bunch of boxes, and again, that can be fun, but it doesn't have this same sort of mysterious texture that we're talking about. This doesn't super happen in Tunic, but it's something that I'd like to think more about, is using, it happens a little bit implicitly, but using symmetry and people's expectations to break expectations, to violate that. And so if you've got like a grid like this and add a new dimension of symmetry, that would be really cool. And a few Zelda games do this with like a light dark world. And that's cool. Like, imagine if you didn't know that, and suddenly the world's turned on its head, and you get to see things with a whole new light. Originally, the upgrade items in Tunic were these very bland, uninteresting sort of coin things that you collect, and they were boring because once you had two of them, you could sort of see what the whole set was going to be. It's going to be this shape with a squiggle on it. It's not as interesting, right? That's an example of how symmetry can sort of make you realize, sort of prematurely fill out your grid. And so they were changed a little bit. And in the UI, they're still grouped together in a particular way, but there's just a little bit more mystery, right? And more likely to have a little bit of excitement when you get this strange fox figurine and, or this weird mushroom. What are they for? And even if you are missing one, you might still not know what it looks like, and that's a little exciting. Avoiding upper bounds is something that I think is important, and this is cribbed a little bit from that Jim Stormdancer talk where he talks about revealing, there's a bit in Skyrim or something, if you go into the UI, it says like automata dispatched and some percentage complete or something like that, and it's just, what is it's something like, I can't think of a less interesting way to reveal that there are robots in your fantasy game. So avoiding upper bounds is important, just to leave the possibility of there being more, even when there isn't. Shh, you don't need to tell anybody, but sometimes you could just have a certain amount and let people think that there's more. There are lots of upper bounds in Tunic, like you're literally collecting the 3 MacGuffins, and there's slots for it in the UI, and collect these 20 things, do these 12 things. But wherever possible, try to keep that, we tried to keep that sort of a little bit more vague, like a sort of elastic inventory where there's not slots for everything. It means that you're never really sure if you found all the collectibles, right? Even with the key items down there at the bottom, it sort of looks like you found all of them, but we just tack another one on the end there that sticks out the side, which I like. I like the idea of maybe someone thinking that they had all of them, but then not. Having some secrets be a big deal, I think, is an important thing. And this is not easy, but I think having just 1 or 2 facets in the game was important to help people feel like, anything could bust this thing wide open, It takes a lot of planning, but the hope is that, if it's possible for people to have something that really opens things wide up, then, any number of these other loose ends might suddenly be, really profound. Which one of these things that I don't understand yet is going to change everything? So there are a few things like that in Tunic. There's a mechanic that's introduced partway through that lets you know you could have interacted with things in a certain way the whole time, and then another sort of similar reveal that happens in the late game. Yeah, spoilers. Just reminding myself. So, related to all these things is this, this was here the whole time sort of thing, this hidden in plain sight idea. And just to be super explicit, this is the thing where you discover something and realize you could have found it earlier and that nothing was preventing you from having done that. And I really like that. I found out if making a game about secrets, and this was here all along, told me one thing, is that some people don't like this. But I do. And so I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why I think it's neat. Why is this, for the people that do like it, why is it such an appealing thought for something to have been there before we knew it was there? So I'm going to quickly go through a few reasons that are sort of like motivations as to why, or why this is even worth considering. Verisimilitude, or realness, is a big one. So just like real life, things don't magically appear when they're ready to be found. And sort of a weird example, there's a game, Her Story. People are familiar with this game? Yeah, okay. For those who don't know, it's a game where you're looking through videotapes of an interrogation, and you're searching by the transcript. And so you might type in, help, and you get the first 5 entries that match that string, found in the transcript. And that's really neat, because that is sort of the vast majority of the nuts and bolts of the game, right? It's the content that you're exploring. And so once you know that about the game, it feels like you are truly, being a detective, Someone isn't watching over your shoulder. You are examining this game. The game exists as sort of this player ambivalent object, and you're doing the thing that comes to mind a lot is honest archaeology, and you're just digging where you dig. You're sort of on your own at that point. And that's an appealing thought to me. Another one is exclusion. Because you could have found something earlier, but you didn't, theoretically, you could have not found it ever. And so not everyone is going to find this, and that makes you special. I found the warp zone when I was a kid, and it was probably the first time I had ever seen the word warp or zone. And I didn't know about it beforehand. This was like a true sort of like putting two mechanics together as a child, and just being, I think I let the timer run down. I was so terrified. I didn't know what to do. Getting in over your head. This is one of, I think, very few Dark Souls references in the talk. So I'm sorry, I had a quota, just a small number. Let's say you do find a cool thing, and it's stumbling into a late game area. You get this, like, this is way above my pay grade sort of feeling. And that's neat because it feels like there's no, designer hovering behind you, crafting an experience to make sure you're having the perfect time. You really did find something. This was here all along, I think, is cool because it allows for more personal stories. People are going to find things in different orders, making for more interesting stories to tell one another, or to just, hold in your heart as you think back to a game. Replayability and speedrunning is really important. I think if you can do things in multiple orders by having the paths not be quite so linear, it means that you can approach a game from different directions. And then the speedrunning community will take that and run, really. I guess literally. It's in Super Metroid, there's the mechanic that is probably encountered partway through that allows you to do wall jumping. It's really tricky and not something you would stumble into normally. But once you know that, you can start, playing the game in wildly different orders and breaking it in interesting ways. I don't have a lot of I don't have evidence for any of this, really, but this one especially I don't. But personally, I feel like if I feel like I found something by myself, I'm less likely to feel like I'm falling behind. So if a game didn't want me to see this, then I can be excited about it existing, but I shouldn't feel like the game is expecting me to understand right away. It can stay as a question mark and be tantalizing, but I don't feel like, oh gosh, is this going to be on the test or anything like that. because I sort of haven't been taught it yet, if that makes sense. The most important thing that I think all of these are related to, though, the main reason why I think this was here all along is cool, is what else are you not telling me? What else did I miss? So an example that's brought up a lot in this realm, I think, is bombable walls in The Legend of Zelda. So imagine you're playing Zelda 1 and you don't know about bombable walls, if that's possible. Put yourself in that headspace, and then you do accidentally find when you're fighting enemies or something with bombs and you blow open a wall. That's kind of mind-blowing. It was an accident, and now there's this, again, whole new dimension to the world. Every wall you've walked past could now be a secret, and you get to look at the world through new eyes. And so in our little mental map, this thing of concepts that we're tying together and giving birth to new concepts, we're focused on this end, right? We're looking at all of our loose ends and speculating on how they might connect together. But if we take one of those dead ends and say, that wasn't a dead end, suddenly, unexpectedly add something to it, then the players is going to not just speculate at the end there, but start to say, wait a second, maybe that wasn't a dead end either, or that, or all of these, who knows? And that's exciting to me. So this was here all along. Those are the reasons why I think it's cool. And here's some ways that we tried to promote that feeling in Tunic. Some of them are rules of thumb. Others are going to contradict one another directly because they're different techniques that we used in different scenarios. And the main point with a bullet really was just to let the player bumble around and transgress and do things that they're not supposed to do, and sort of be honest about that. So that's really what all of these are about. Make them feel like they're truly exploring. Make them feel a little bit like the designer has checked out, that no one's watching their every move, trying to make sure they're having a good time. That feeling of being on your own. We talked a lot during development about soft gates and hard gates, and I did a little bit of research on this to see what the terminology is. And soft gate seemed to be a lot of like free-to-play stuff, and maybe sometimes gates, like obstacles in a game that were meant to physically slow your character down. So I'll define what I mean. I mean, a hard gate is an obstacle that requires a key of some kind, whether that's a special item or having talked to a person or something. Like the game logic is you need to have done this. That is the requirement. And a soft gate is, well, maybe not, right? Yes, there is a way to do this in the way that you might expect, but maybe there are some other ways. For instance, in Tunic, there's this enemy on a really thin ledge, and it's strong, it has a shield, and it's meant to send a very strong go away message. The normal ways you might deal with enemies, I've got these special techniques, they're not working, I throw bombs, and because it's on a thin ledge, they keep falling off. The ledge is actually very slightly sloped like this to make sure that your bombs fall off either side and make it tricky. But there are ways to get past it. There's a rare item that you can use to distract it. That ledge up top there, you can throw bombs down from that and then come around. You can freeze the enemy, maybe get some hits in, and then make it drop its shield and take it from there, right? What you're supposed to do is wait for an item that lets you bypass it, or pull it off the ledge, or tug its shield away or something like that. But there are plenty of other ways to go about it. You could also just go around. There's on the other side of that main area, there's just a path you can slip behind that takes you to the opposite side of the world, and you could loop around to here. And I suspect that with that sort of mentality, players begin to sort of detect that they can get away with things, if that makes sense. Just like the fact that there are these other possibilities, even though they don't find them, sort of radiates this feeling of like, there's more to this than I thought. And I think that is better than just sealing something off in your mind and say like, oh, I'm not supposed to do that yet. This is a locked door. I can safely forget about it. The game will tell me when I'm supposed to care about this. If you instill this sense of things being sort of softly gated sometimes, then I think that path is sort of kept alive in the player's mind. There are also sort of in-betweensies that are definitely sort of like hard gates with an asterisk, right? Key required, in quotes. And they're situations where, yes, we really want you to do this in a particular way, but we know that it's possible to slip past. So there's a late game area called the Cathedral, and I don't know if you can see there, we've got a secret SFX trigger because we knew there was a way to get through there. I'll show you here, this is a speed run by Glacia. Is this going to play? There we go. Turns out that you can freeze someone and then whip through them and they move back, and it allows you to clip through the... There's a little secret sound effect that we play there to be like, we see you. We knew that this was possible. But that was like a firm gate is a term that we would use. We're like, we don't want people to bumble into this, really. That would be really bad. But for people who want to do speedrunning stuff or do sort of exciting things with the game, we'll let that happen. Security through obscurity was something that we thought about a lot. There were some things that we really didn't want the player to discover until the time was right. So one of the key mechanics in the game is this revealed in this page here. This is a non-optional mechanic that you require to progress. And in some games, some ways, getting this page was sort of the moment that the game was built around, learning that you can interact with the world in a way that you didn't know about. And under no circumstances could we make people think that they had unlocked an ability when they picked up the page, because they hadn't. It's an ability that you have from the very start of the game. We just, want to let them know at this point. And we couldn't do the standard trick of, locking them in a room until they demonstrate that they know how to do it and then they can progress, because that feels like the design is acknowledging your presence as a player. And isn't this thing that we want of the game being this player ambivalent artifact that you're examining? For pacing reasons, though, we really wanted to, delay this reveal for as long as possible. So that was a problem. We've got this thing that we want to hide really, really well, but we also need them to know about it at a certain point. So we kept it as hidden as we could. So there are a couple of places where the beans would really be spilled, here and here, and so we distract them by putting an item on the platform. And then when it comes time to do the reveal, we go really hard on communicating the point. And the only mechanics in the game that get these really big spreads are the ones where we really, really want people to get it, whether they get it right away or they're flipping through the manual later on. But the book is static, right? Collecting any individual page does not change anything else about the world. And we just have to trust the player to read it. I guess trusting the player is something that maybe I should add in here as well. It was an important thing that we wanted to do, is to just trust the player to explore, and let them find things. There is a little bit of sleight of hand that we do here. There is a visual effect that accompanies what you can do, where this sort of column of light appears. And we just have even though the mechanic is still fully functional, we don't have the column of light appear really early in the game. It gets activated when you do something unrelated, maybe a half hour or so before you find this page, just to make sure that if the first thing people do is, press and hold a button, the things aren't immediately ruined for them. So this was a lot of work to be sort of cagey and oblique for something that's required. So one of the things that we did a lot was just make stuff optional. And I think there's a lot of power there. So the big risk with the mandatory critical path stuff is that if we let the player on their own and hope that they figure things out, they just might not get it. And if we're too obvious, then we sort of ruin the illusion. So one way to deal with it is to make things be optional, have it be okay for stuff to be missed. And the prize down this particular path is sort of like a nice to have, as opposed to a critical path thing. So the sprinting example here is you can sprint in the game. And there's no pop-up. It's just like, this is how you run. We just either let people find it or it's called out in the manual once or twice, but it's not required, right? And you get a little bit of joy when you do find it, hopefully. Another thing is the "you are here" marker. So on the map, if you look really closely, there's a "you are here" marker that's this sort of like little illustration of the fox that's rendered the same as everything else. And so when people notice that the map is changing and that little thing is moving around, they can put two and two together and realize that this is, a cool mechanic that wasn't explicitly noted. If we had said, this game has a "you are here" mechanic, and open the manual, and if there's a map, this is where you are, right? That's not really exciting. Maps usually have that sort of thing, but leaving it as something that's not mentioned and sort of baked into the aesthetic of the manual meant that it was, something that it's not required by any means, but, it's fun when you find it. We do call it out a little bit, just down here. And there you are. You can use the map. Relatedly, when we thought about adding any particular thing, we would assign it a percentage, like 90% or 10% secrets. And this is, again, super non-empirical, but sort of like gut feeling of how many people we want to find it the first time through, or their first brush with it in the game. So, for example, this doorway here, this is where you get your first weapon. It's not really a secret, but it's technically optional. You could go past it, but we really wanted most people to find that. And so, we call that a 99% secret. It's got a special awning. It's got these animated flame things, and it's got a glow and a path literally going into it. We really wanted people to go in there. On the other hand, there's a little path like this, right? That's a little secret path you can go to. You're not really skipping anything, but you can sort of explore an area that we were saving as a treat for later. And so that's like a 15%. It's cool if some people find it and feel like, oh, I'm in over my head now. I'm in a place where I'm not supposed to be. I just did this. I found this thing. And you get to do all the cool normal. This is sort of fun and satisfying. You get to use those same level design techniques to highlight something, or that you would use to highlight something to de-highlight something. So we've got stairs going down that are pointing right at a bridge that is pointing at this item that you want that's bright on the screen. So we're doing everything we can in our power to distract people from the secret that's up there. And it worked pretty well. As a sort of side effect, when people do find it, they're on the other side of the secret and they come on through, they're sort of primed. They might be a little annoyed at this point that was there the whole time and they didn't know about it, or they're delighted. But very nearby, there's, give them a little treat. Or if they do the same trick, they'll find something that maybe they didn't find before. And so maybe this, 15% or 20% secret goes way up to 80% because people, they've been burned before and they know to nose around in corners. There's another one here that was a passage that lets you go down into a little room. This one was pretty well hidden, I think, because we wanted it to. This is a room where you can customize the look of your fox, change your color palette, and that could be kept quite low because chances are if you're looking over someone's shoulder or you see a screenshot or you're watching a stream or something and you see someone with an unexpectedly colored fox, you might say, hey, how did you do that? So we can keep the percentage quite low because then you get that sort of like community sharing sort of thing. That's the hope, at least. Another thing I thought about a lot was hiding big things shallowly. And this is where some secrets are kept sort of close to the surface so that people are more likely to find them, which I think is especially important with large secrets. So this is sort of the opposite of security through obscurity. So I'm going to throw another analogy at you. We've got this pool of water, and the depth of it is how hidden something is. Down here, it's like really, really well hidden. We're going out of our way for people to not find it. And up here, it's more obvious. And player perception is up here. If things are above the surface, they're extremely obvious. If they're just under the surface, then maybe you spot them, maybe you don't. And then that prayer mechanic is kept we really wanted that to be hidden. And you let it go, and then suddenly you have that reveal where it skyrockets. That's that big delta from very hidden to we really want you to know this. And that works for some secrets and is what was required for them. But for other things, there's a different path, which is it's just sort of hovering below the surface. And maybe every once in a while we give you a little poke, a little extra hint to make it surface a little bit more. The upgrades system is a little bit like that. It's not some special complex button combination you need to do. You just need to be standing next to a checkpoint when you open your inventory. And people might discover that by happenstance, or they might read about it in the manual here, and they have a little moment of joy of understanding. And the language is a little bit like that as well. There are lots of starting points. There's that says, you are here, right? Which is maybe a good starting point with the language. And there are lots of those, lots of things that might be reasonable places if people are so inclined to uncover how the thing works without having, we weren't super cagey about hiding a Rosetta Stone super deep and not having it anywhere else. We just sort of tried to use it naturally, and so it feels a little bit more like that honest archaeology experience. And the reason I think that that's neat, is that a secret can feel bigger and realer if you stumble into it. Like a secret or like a system or some sort of truth about something. If it's big, if it's really big, then something that big isn't going to stay hidden forever. It's almost like you're stubbing your toe on some massive structure that's hidden just beneath the surface, right? That in and of itself, I think, is kind of exciting. Like an analogy like buried treasure. It's cool to think of buried treasure, deep beneath the earth, right? That's an exciting thought. But realizing that the treasure is so big that parts of it are poking up into the surface all over the place is maybe even more exciting. It's something truly enormous. Having 0% secrets is something we talked about. So this is where you bury things super deep. As deep as we want it in some cases. And then whether it's glimpses of it that we get firsthand or hushed community chatter, the secrets have sort of, it feels like they glow, they sort of radiate mystery out to the rest of the game. And some of the secrets in Tunic are not really meant for everybody to find. This one requires collecting a whole pile of stuff and understanding the weird runic language and then solving a riddle and going to a domain name and stuff like that. There's secrets hidden in the gem count of a corrupted save. By putting two unrelated mechanics together, you can find this, secret early version of the overworld that we weren't really sure if anyone would find. Kevin Regami, the audio designer on the game, hid an entire second secret language that he recently did a tweet thread about that you should check out, where the messages are hidden in the arpeggios of all the sound effects in the game. And Terrence Lee and Janice Kwan, the composers, also have sort of messages threaded throughout the entire soundtrack. So in truth, they're not really 0% secrets. Someone is going to find them, so you can kind of go ham on hiding them, like really do whatever you want to hide them deep. And we called it content for no one. We knew that someone out there is going to find it, probably. But let's say you're making something and you have a secret that is so well hidden that no one does find it. Let's say you've got a path that no one truly gets to the end of, and that's a cool thing, I think, right? Because then you have something that fades into the mist, and for people that know about it, it gets to be the greatest thing of all, which is a mystery forever. I think we're going to do a question phase at some point.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can grab that mic.
Oh, okay.
Yep, grab that one.
Oh, you meant just the mic, didn't you?
Either way.
All right, thank you so much, Andrew, for that talk. I'm going to lower my mic. Mask. And we will open up to questions in a second, but I had a couple questions in response to the talk that I've heard it after the pitch. And I think the title, which was a surprise to me, I really like it. And I agree generally with the content talk that like to say this was here all along is quite like a joyous feeling most of the times. But there's always a version of that question that could be like, this was here all along.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
exactly.
And I think a lot of like a big part of game development is like expectation management, and completionists will want to play your game, and people who want to understand things really early would want to play your game.
Yeah.
And I think Tunic is built on the knowledge that players will go off the critical path, and like they will check under waterfalls, those kind of things. But it pushes it to a point where it's like every surface is traversable. Eventually, and also there are it's like a 4x3 game that suddenly I'm like playing in a 16:9 dimension where there's just like paths places where I'm like, how can you get there? And it's never clear sometimes until maybe it's too late. Maybe I'm like in another place. So I guess I wanted to ask about how you managed players encountering some of these secrets early, or seeing places that they really wanted to get to but couldn't for whatever reason, or did you not care about those kind of people?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's certainly tricky because I love that feeling. I like not knowing. I like speculating, and having that sort of raw end in the back of my mind. So yeah, for completionists, it's a little bit tricky. And I guess in that case, in Tunic's case in particular, there's plenty of guides and stuff that tell you, like, here's how you get 100% of all the things. And if that's how someone wants to play the game, that's absolutely 100% fine. That sounds great. I like the idea of having things disappear into the distance, never really being sure when something is over. The prospect of there being sort of a surface layer of here's what the game wants you to think that it is, a layer just underneath that is like, oh, here's what the game actually is, and then the secrets layer underneath where it all comes together and it's a vast interconnected world full of all this mystery. Like, what if there's a layer even underneath that, the one that is you can't really focus on, it's blurry, it falls out of your brain, that's exciting because that makes something feel like it could go on forever.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest mind blows for me playing it for the first time was like, there's no negative space in this game. There's like water, but you can cross it at one point. And I think games that look like this from this perspective, I usually assume there's negative space, like places I can't go, places that is just decor, those kinds of things. And I think just learning more and more that it's not true, it's all positive, it's all places you can go, was quite surprising. But games like Tunic also, I think, sell this really great fantasy of like the more you live in this world, the more you know. And I think it is a fantasy because in real life, that's not how it works. I think the more you live, the less you know because it just gets bigger. But things like language, for example, that could be something that's cumulative as you live in a world, right? And I want to ask about the language in your game, both the glyphs, which I'll ask about in a second, but also there's a tinge of localization in the readable language as well, where I think it's the font that you use, the typeface, where it kind of feels like it's a Japanese font, and it's trying to like do like a Latin Unicode.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of narrow, these texts and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway,
like a
that
monospace,
plus, and the glyphs. I guess I wanted to know, was your intent behind this fake language that the players start to learn it, or would they like stay a tourist kind of and operate on vibes?
Vibes for sure, to start at least. Originally, the thought of, hey, what if there was this world where you really felt like a stranger in a strange land? You didn't understand everything. Everything was inherently mysterious. Well, let's have a cool secret language. And then, as a neat Easter egg, what if it actually meant something? That's cool. Will anybody actually figure it out? Nah. And so it started from there of trying to evoke this feeling of being in a place where you're not supposed to be. And in the end, it was cool because we had people share stories about playing import games where they said this captures that same feeling of getting, in North America, a Japanese import and not being able to read it, or, someone in the Netherlands getting a German import and not being able to read it. And that's cool. I didn't have that experience, but I had the experience of leafing through manuals and not knowing, like, I don't know what a morph ball is, and I'm reading the Metroid 2 manual. And it had that same sort of feeling of letting your imagination take over. The game needs to fit on the cartridge, but the book leaves a lot more doors open.
Speaking of the book, did you have a specific instruction manual that was an inspiration for the manual of your game?
Sort of an amalgam, but a bunch of them. Let's see, Zelda 2, Metroid 2.
So were you the one to write in your instruction manuals, or was that someone in your life?
No, I would never do that.
Yeah. But you wrote in yours, like preemptively. For
Yes,
the players,
yeah, exactly. So Star Tropics was a cool one. Metroid 2 is neat because Metroid 2 is a Game Boy game. Notable in that it's hard to look over someone's shoulder. So when my next door neighbor had Metroid 2, my experience of that was just leafing through the manual while they played it. And so I could maybe hear the sounds of the game and I could read about all these things, but I had no idea what any of it meant. And that was sort of cool and exciting. Again, sort of letting your child imagination fill in all the gaps.
Nice. I guess I also wanted to ask, I talk about pastiching in some of my classes about one of the goals for art direction in games, which is just like you're referencing, a particular artist or like an era in order to kind of signal the values of that time or that artist or whatever. I think the art style of Tunic is pretty singular. I don't think it's directly referencing any existing art styles, but it is kind of referencing very specific feeling of like, being in a musty bedroom and like blowing on the cartridge. And I think it's a couple things. I definitely think isometric view helps with that. But I also think it's kind of like this art style that is kind of what we imagined the bad graphics of that time were. Like, if we harken back to that time, this is kind of like the beauty and all the kind of chromatic aberration and stuff like that. It was kind of being filled in our heads as we were playing these like bad graphics games, basically. But my question actually is like, you had come up with the style really early, because the demo that I played also was, of this view and of the style. But as game development goes, it takes a long time for it to come out. So the reference point may be a little further than maybe you had first conceived. So my question was, I guess there may be some people in the player base who don't have that reference. Or do you think it's a sort of timeless feeling that anyone of any generation can really kind of feel? Or did you not care and were like, well, this is my idea of like that experience?
Yeah. I think the palette of blue ocean and sort of brown red dirt and green grass is aesthetically appealing, separate from nostalgia, but it does definitely reference a lot of those old things. The art style started very simple, mostly because I wanted something that I could sort of do on my own, and it wouldn't be too complicated or take too long. And as I found that building a ruined-looking world with simple geometry was sort of tricky. And so the aesthetic evolved a lot over the years and got more detailed, textures got added, stuff like that. But it still tried to stay true to this very simple, original geometric style, which I think, related to what you were saying, is this sort of like, I don't know, aesthetic simplicity that makes the world feel like small and cute and approachable, if that makes sense. And maybe that is timeless, if not specifically referencing, like old CRTs and pixel art and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think nostalgia in general is a pretty dangerous feeling, right? I think it's one of the most kind of damaging things for culture because it's kind of insatiable, right? Mm-hmm. Like we will never feel the same kind of emotional intensity as we did when we were young about anything that new that comes out, because the thing that actually changes us, right? Mm. We outgrew that feeling. Yeah. But I think like Tunic is able to like evoke it without necessarily making like direct reference to it, and I think it wins out in that way. But I think generally, I kind of forgive it in games, and I want to hear your thought on that. Of like, I think when we look for nostalgia in games, it's a little bit less. I think it's absolved of its toxicity a little bit and becomes a bit more innocent, mostly because there's like it's material and it's like textural, and like we can feel the times of when we were young and having played it. So I think it's a little bit less. Because it is a tangible nostalgia, maybe it's a little bit better. But do you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, that's a big topic for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the dangerous part of nostalgia is thinking of things as like the good old days, which is dangerous. And so maybe the hope, I guess, with Tunic was not to use the trappings of old things to sort of signal like, hey, look, it's got pixels and stuff like that. It's beepy and bloopy. It reminds you of the good old days. It was more like, what was the emotion that we had there, and why was that special? And trying to build something new around that. I mean, that's self-aggrandizing, I think. But that was the intention, at least, was maybe to approach an emotion from a different direction as opposed to, retreading the same path.
Nice, thanks. I guess that's all the questions I have. I guess I'll pass the mic around. Is that correct? Okay. Does anyone have a question for Andrew in the room? I will go by proximity.
Hello. So you talked about at the beginning about how you like to keep people in like the knowledge space.
Sorry, where are you?
Hello.
Oh, there you are. Hello.
You can't see my mouth moving. You talk about keeping people in the knowledge space. I was curious because I find when I play games with a lot of secrets, it's possible to end up on two different sides of that. Where on one hand, sometimes I get stuck into a space where it's like, there's a secret here, but like, I'm playing an adventure game and I put this paperclip on everything, and I just can't figure out what this paperclip is for. It drives me crazy and get sick of it. And then there's the other side where it's like I play a Metroid game and it's like I know I can shoot certain blocks and reveal a missile tank. And by the end of the game, I've shot 5,000 blocks. I'm so sick of shooting blocks. And so I'm curious how you land in that sweet spot when you're designing your secrets to make sure the player's not super.
Good question. Yeah. I don't know. One thing that I had some slides for that I removed actually was specifically that, like hey, I found out I can bomb walls. That is a wonderful invitation to now bomb every single wall in the entire game. And now you have a problem where people are wasting time or having this weird sort of FOMO, fear of missing out, when they know all those question marks are in those places, and if they're not the sort of person that's excited by that, maybe they're very frustrated by it. And so one way, I think, is to have clues that are innocuous, So I think a crack in a bombable wall, it's not really a secret anymore. Like, we know that really well, right? You can see it and you start to speculate about it. In Tunic, there are bombable walls, but they, generally speaking, have a little set of 3 flowers around them, right? And so you give people the opportunity to learn, not only are there bombable walls and they could be anywhere, but they're not anywhere. There's this trick that helps me find them. And that's one way of doing it. I'm not sure if that's generalizable or anything like that, but maybe trying to have another layer of reveal associated with it that can help sort of tamp down that feeling that you need to bomb everything. But yeah, that's a good question worth thinking about for sure.
So yeah, one of the things about developing single-player games is that you could play the game and you know if it feels good or not. But when it comes to Tunic in this case, like if you're like, this could definitely be a aha moment, but then again, you really can't decide if that's an aha moment, right? Which means for the amount of content which you have generated, there's going to be tons of playtests. So how did you like plan your playtest out so that you kind of got the feedback which you were expecting, but also had enough playtests and not too many? Like how did you balance the whole thing out?
We did do a lot of playtesting, and it was usually, one thing that we did do was invite people to play the game without the designer over their shoulder. So we would do sometimes like a Discord call, and I would say explicitly, I'm gonna go away. I'm just gonna have this window open, and record it. Like we were explicit about this, like we're gonna do a recording, or they would do a recording locally and send it over. And then you allowed people to play at their own pace and could scrub through it and check specific spots and be like, wait, why did they go here instead of here? And the fact that the players were able to play at their own pace, I think, helped with that a lot, and also made the playtesting process a little bit easier logistically because both people didn't need to be present. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that was one thing that we did.
So I'm curious about your game dev journey, a little bit about your background, like some skills that helped you along this path to your prototype. You said you spent 7 years where you stopped working on the game. Maybe like kind of walk us through the journey of like from prototype to launch a little bit. I think
Yeah.
really helpful.
Sure. So I started working it in 2015, and maybe I wasn't clear. 7 years happened was me spending 7 years working on the game full time. So I was working at a job doing hidden object games, casual sort of puzzle games, and that was neat to a certain extent. It wasn't sort of the games that filled me with excitement. And then that company started doing some stuff that I was even less interested in. And so I had done some game jams and thought, hey, it's time to, strike out on my own, and realized very quickly that being on my own was hard. And so got help from people doing audio design and music and business development help and stuff like that. And that's, I guess, is the skill background. Are you looking for like how is?
How did you find the help?
Find the help?
Yeah, how did you build the relationships?
Sure. Annoyingly through social media and like shows and conferences and things. And that's an annoying answer because it's like sort of inherently exclusionary in some ways. It's like just, know the right people, talk to people and hang out and spend lots of time cultivating relationships. But it was serendipitous, I shared a prototype video on Vine, RIP Vine, and a few people saw it and said like, hey, this is really neat. I'm interested in working on this. Sometimes it was like a cold call on my part, like the Terrence Lee and Janice Kwan, who did the soundtrack. I reached out to them, made a little trailer using the music of one of the previous albums and said, wouldn't this be cool if we worked together? And they said yes. So I guess a variety of things, but I think the main thing was using community.
And how long did you work on the prototype before you started reaching out to people?
About a year, I think. Yeah.
I'm really curious about reasons why people don't like games. And so I know we talked about the potential for frustration. Like we bomb 100,000 walls, and that's frustrating when you just can't figure out something. But I remember you said when you were talking about that moment of, oh, it was always there in the world, that you really love that moment, and that there are other people who don't like it. I'm very curious about that. Like, is it actually that moment when they discover something, and then they're mad about it? Like, I'm just curious if you observe that in people who play Tunic.
Yes, if I try to stay out of the Steam forums, but every now and again. Yeah, I think it's two broad categories of frustration. One is what we were talking about before, where someone wants to know all the things right away, or get all of the secrets. And the second type is, this was here all along. Like that's. I feel like you pulled one over on me, and I don't like that.
So it's like a feeling that you were messing with them, and like, how dare you, Andrew?
Yeah, I guess so, which is weird because that's sort of antithetical to the idea of feeling like there's no designer and you're just exploring something that exists, right? But that territory gets muddied a little bit when you get into especially deeper puzzle stuff where you get that sort of wink and nod, I know that you know, sort of thing. And then it becomes more of a conversation between the player and the designer. But on the surface, I think that the most appealing thing is, for me at least, is that feeling of player ambivalence. But yeah, I guess some people want a more curated experience, which is also fine, I think. I didn't answer your question, I'm sorry.
No, that definitely answered it.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for a super interesting talk. I mean, it's really delightful, the detail that you bring us into your thought process and design process. I want to build on Naomi's question a little bit, and I think it's so interesting that you focused on this idea of kind of guiding the player through this landscape of discovering secrets, and I guess I kept on thinking about there's sort of like torn in a couple directions as you were talking. On the one hand, it seems like you are, creating this wonderful palette for players to have these experiences of discovery and mystery. And on the other hand, I also kept on thinking, it's like we're sort of coddling the player, right? In some way, it's almost like, all right, you're designing these moments of discovery, but it's almost like you're designing this sort of baby crib for the player to sort of like, to sort of shape, it's like a special place for them to be able to crawl around and have these sort of artificial experiences of discovery and mystery. And I was thinking about Meg Janth, who's a game writer, and she was writing and speaking about her experience of 80 days and talking about this notion of player entitlement. That as game designers, often we are there to sort of service the players and kind of bring them pleasure. And as an alternative, like what would it mean to challenge them to kind of not put them at the center of the universe and to, I don't know, I don't know what the answer is, because I'm not saying that you are merely coddling the player, because one wonders what the alternative could be. But I think about what mystery and discovery is if one is getting really, really deep into tennis or chess, right? And uncovering a system as you are in conversation with another player, for example, or really sort of uncovering the way that other people are expressing themselves through the game, which feels different than sort of like finding the little secrets that the sort of trails of breadcrumbs that you as the designer has laid out for them. So that it seems like there's sort of different types of mystery and discovery. And anyway, I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yes, you're right. Tunic is a trick. It is very the talk is largely aspirational. Like this is the things that I value in games, and as Tunic was developing, a lot of times we would use the term like, oh, this is just a real video game. Like we would realize that it had been very. It was the most video game in some senses. Do you know what I mean? And you're right. I think that is on the opposite. That's antipodal to this idea of like actually truly discovering something, right? If you set up a simple rule like a fractal and can explore that forever, that's really true discovery, right? That's, there is no designer there, right? That just is something that exists, and you get to zoom in deeper and deeper and deeper, like chess or whatever. But this is a trick, right? This is a toy that is carefully designed to try and evoke those feelings in like you mentioned, like a contained environment. So yeah, I agree, I guess. And a lot of the ideas here are things that I like. Looking at the talk as I was preparing it, I thought there are a lot of circumstances where these ideals are stopped. They're not fully expressed in this end product, which ended up being more video gamey than I was expecting it to be, if that makes sense. Maybe.
We have time for one more. Oh, yeah, good.
All right, if I'm the last person, I'm going to sneak a second question in. It's a short one. The big question I'm curious about is like working on 7 years is like a long time to work on something. Which congratulations, like that's a lot. I guess what was your reaction when Nintendo announced the
Link to the Past remake,
Yeah.
or not Link to the Past, was it Link's Awakening?
Link's Awakening, yeah, because it's like similar enough critically to like draw comparisons. Was that a bad day, a good day?
There's a lot of bad days. Yeah, I'm sure anybody who's made something, I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe this is not a universal experience, but looking at something and being like, oh, but this is how they're doing it. I should be doing it that way. So yeah, that was an experience for sure. I mean, maybe in some ways it's sort of validating to know that sort of like vibe is still alive. I assume that game ended up being quite like the original Link's Awakening. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. So not like an awesome day, if that's the answer you're looking for.
Okay. The second half. How much of the game is still unexplored? Like we talk about content for no one. Is there still content no one's found?
I think, based on this talk, if I were to answer that question, it would invalidate the whole thing.
Nice. Hold on, I lied. I have a final question. I will not because I'm the MC of the privilege. And it's partly sort of a PR for a recent console release game. I know that you recently had to port this game to PS5, and one of the requirements for a PS5 is now they have this kind of help me system.
Yeah, it's not technically required, but sort of a fun thing to put in.
So where basically any time when you're playing a game on PS5, you can click a button and just get hints to where you are right now, or you can sometimes even warp to certain parts of the level. Maybe not for your game, but some of the games require that. It's a little bit of an accessibility point, but how did it feel to kind of design that system into your game?
Right. When it was first brought up, it seemed like, well, that would never work for this game. It's a game about not knowing things. We can't have a button that you press that tells you all the things. But we ended up implementing it, and it was pretty fun. An interesting challenge to sort of now suddenly track what the player probably knows and what they've done and build a sort of graph of dependencies around that. But content-wise, it was neat because it meant that we could extend game design out beyond the game itself, much like manuals in old NES games were extensions of the game itself. The design existed in the manual as well. We could have a little bit of design fun with this auxiliary content, and instead of someone calling out to whatever random guide on the internet, we now could give them our version of that. And the way that the game help system works is that the reveals are staggered. Like you press a button and you get a little bit more information if you want it. And that means that we communicated with the people that wrote the actual tips, and so they were able to carry forward the voice of the game a little bit, sort of that cagey, hey, have you checked out page whatever, or have you tried going down this way, which ended up being pretty neat.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for the talk.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank Fresh Planet, Take Two Interactive, Parsec, the Peabody Awards, Clarkson Power, and Empire State Development for their service. Thank you.